The photograph wasn't a memory. It was a ghost, a faded, black and white ghost of a little boy in a sailor suit, captured almost 70 years ago. I found it tucked away in my dead grandmother's album. But the reason my heart stopped, the reason the air in the dusty attic turned to ice, was not the age of the photo. It was the boy's face. It was the face of my husband. I showed it to him, my hands trembling. He laughed, calling it a bizarre coincidence. He thought the lie would hold. He thought the story ended there. He had no idea I was about to unravel a secret so dark, so old. It would not only destroy him but annihilate an entire dynasty. He didn't know that my quiet, simple grandmother had left me a roadmap to war, and I was about to follow it all the way back to him. My name is Clara. Until that moment in the attic, my life had been a quiet masterpiece of contentment. For 10 years, I had been married to Alex, a man who felt less like a husband and more like a soulmate, carved from the same star. Our love story was a quiet, beautiful epic, written in shared laughter and whispered secrets. But a single, faded photograph, hidden for over 70 years, has turned our epic into a terrifying mystery. As I sit here now, in the dead of night, I realize my entire life, my entire marriage, might be a meticulously crafted lie, and the man sleeping peacefully in the next room isn't the man I married. He's a ghost from a past I never knew existed, a past that belongs to my grandma. My grandmother, Eleanor, passed away 6 months ago. She was my family's gentle, loving matriarch, the keeper of our history. She raised me after my parents' death. Her small, cozy house, a sanctuary of lavender scents and whispered bedtime stories. Her death left a hole in my heart, and the task of sorting through her life's belongings fell to me. I took my time, wanting to honor her memory, spending weekends at her old house, sifting through a century of a life well lived. Last Saturday, I found the trunk in her attic. It was heavy, bound in leather and brass, a relic from another era. Inside, it was a time capsule, her wedding veil, old letters tied with faded ribbon, and at the very bottom, a stack of photo albums I had never seen before. I sat on the dusty floor and opened the oldest one. The pages were brittle, the photos sepia-toned. They were images from the 1940s and 50s, a life my grandmother had never spoken of, filled with people I didn't recognize. Stern men in heavy suits, elegant women at garden parties. It was a world away from the simple country life I had always known her to live. And then I turned the page, and the floor fell out from beneath me. The photograph was of a family at a picnic. A handsome, severe-looking man, a beautiful, sad-eyed woman, and a little boy of about 5 or 6. The boy was holding a small, hand-carved wooden bird. He had a mischievous, confident smile and a tiny, almost invisible, crescent-shaped scar just above his right eyebrow. It was my Alex. The shock was a physical blow. It couldn't be. My Alex was 40. This photo was 70 years old. My rational mind screamed doppelganger, coincidence. But my heart knew better. This wasn't just a resemblance. This was him. The exact tilt of his head, The way his eyes held a spark of something both charming and dangerous. With trembling fingers, I carefully peeled the photo from the black paper. On the back, in my grandmother's elegant, faded script, was a caption. The Vances. A day before the tragedy. Little Leo. Leo, not Alex. And Vance, a name that was a curse in my family. I frantically searched the album. I found another photo of the same boy, older now, standing proudly next to a new bicycle. The scar was still there, a tiny silver crescent. The caption beneath this one was even more chilling. Leo Vance, the devil's son, the devil. My blood ran cold. The devil was my grandmother's private name for Alistair Vance, the man who had destroyed my family. The stories were the stuff of family legend, a dark fairy tale whispered down through generations. Alistair Vance, my great-grandfather's best friend and business partner, had stolen his revolutionary patents, driven his company into the ground, and built a global empire on the ashes of my family's ruin. The Sinclairs had been erased, while the Vances thrived, and my husband, the man I loved, was the devil's grandson. That evening, the lie was confirmed. I showed the photo to Alex. His performance was flawless. A moment of feigned shock, a hearty laugh, a dismissive wave of his hand. Wow, that's uncanny. A ghost from the past, he'd said, calling it a bizarre coincidence. But I saw it. For a fraction of a second, before the mask of the loving husband snapped back into place, I saw a flicker of pure, cold panic in his eyes. He knew. I played along, laughing with him. But inside, my world was shattering. My marriage wasn't a love story. It was an infiltration, an invasion. The tragic orphan I had rescued from a lonely life wasn't real. I had married the enemy, the heir to a legacy of betrayal. He was in my home, in my life, for a reason. The question was no longer who he was. The question was, what was he looking for? The photo album wasn't just a collection of memories. It was a warning. A message from my quiet, gentle grandmother. A call to arms from beyond the grave. And I was going to answer it. That night was a masterclass in self-control. I lay beside the man I now knew as Leo Vance, my body a rigid testament to the war raging within me. His every breath felt like a lie. His familiar scent, once a comfort, now smelled of deceit. I feigned sleep, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, a heart I now knew was black with a generational grudge. I mourned the man I thought I had married. The loving, kind, orphaned Alex was dead. He had never existed. In his place was a soldier, a spy sent to finish a war his great-grandfather had started. The next morning, I feigned a headache, a plausible excuse to spend the day at my grandmother's quiet house, away from him. "Take it easy, honey," he'd said, kissing my forehead with lips that now felt like ice. "I'll handle dinner tonight. Just rest." The perfect caring husband. The perfect calculating liar. He had no idea that I wasn't going there to rest. I was going there to arm myself. In the dusty attic, I ignored the albums and went straight for the heavy, leather-bound trunk. My grandmother had been a woman of layers, of secrets. The album was the surface. I was now looking for the core. At the very bottom of the trunk, beneath a false floor concealed by her yellowed wedding veil, I found it. A small, heavy, locked metal box. Taped to its underside was a tiny, ornate key. My hands shook as I unlocked it. The contents were not sentimental keepsakes. They were ammunition. The box was filled with my grandmother's journals, dozens of them, her elegant cursive filling page after page. But this was not the story of a simple country woman. This was the story of a survivor, a fugitive. This was the confession of Lillian Thorne. I spent the entire day consumed by her words. She wrote of a life that was a gilded cake, of her marriage to the industrialist tyrant, Victor Thorne Sr. He was a monster who wore a mask of civility for the world, a man of immense wealth and even more immense cruelty. He controlled her, he belittled her, he saw her as another beautiful object in his vast collection. He looks at me. One entry read, the ink slightly blurred as if by a tear. Not with love, but with the cold calculation of an accountant assessing an asset. I am his wife, the mother of his son, but in his eyes, I am just another line item on his balance sheet. I fear the day he decides my value has depreciated. She wrote of her son, Victor Jr., says that the boy with Alex's face. He was not a source of joy, but a source of terror. He was a miniature version of his father, learning from a young age that power was the only currency that mattered, that empathy was a fatal flaw. He was cruel to the staff, cruel to animals, and dismissive of her. He was his father's son, the heir to an empire of cold, hard steel. The journals were a meticulous record of her escape plan, a plan that took years of patient, terrified planning. She had secretly funneled small amounts of money from her own family's dowry that Victor had absorbed, into a hidden bank account under a false name. She had studied chemistry, learning how to create a fire that would burn hot enough to obscure its origin. She had created a new identity, Lillian Henderson, an orphan with no past. The final entry, dated the night of the fire in 1958, was chilling in its resolve. Tonight, Lillian Thorne and her monstrous son will die in a tragic fire. The world will mourn the loss, but I will be reborn from their ashes. I have taken what is mine, and I will disappear. I will find a quiet place. I will plant a garden. I will live. I will be free. I sat on the floor of that attic, surrounded by the ghosts of her pain and her courage, and I wept. I wept for the life she had been forced to endure, and I wept in awe of her strength. But this earth-shattering revelation brought a new, horrifying mystery. If Victor Thorne Jr. had died in that fire at the age of 18, who was the man sleeping in my bed? The man who looked exactly like him, down to the tiny scar above his eye. The coincidence was now a supernatural impossibility. I knew I was out of my depth. I needed help. I thought of the name on the old newspaper clipping, the Thorne family lawyer, Marcus Gable. A quick search revealed that his son, Marcus Gable Jr., now ran the firm. He was known for being discreet, old-fashioned, and fiercely loyal to his father's legacy. I made the call. "Mr. Gable," I said, my voice trembling. "My name is Clara Sinclair. I am the granddaughter of the late Lillian Henderson. I need to speak with you about a very old, very private matter concerning her past. It involves the Thorne family." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Ms. Sinclair," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, hushed tone. "My father left a sealed file for me, with instructions to open it only if a direct heir of Lillian Henderson ever mentioned the name Thorne. I believe we should meet, immediately." The law offices of Gable and Son were a bastion of old-world power, a place of polished wood, leather-bound books, and the quiet weight of a century of secrets. Mr. Gable Jr., a man in his late 60s with his father's kind but weary eyes, greeted me not with a handshake, but with a look of profound, sorrowful understanding. "I have been waiting for this call my entire professional life," he said, leading me into his private office. He unlocked a heavy safe and retrieved a thick, dust-covered file sealed with wax. "My father was Alistair Vance's lawyer, but his loyalty was to your grandmother. He was in love with her. He was the one who helped her escape." The story he told me filled in the gaps of my grandmother's journals. His father had orchestrated her disappearance, creating her new identity, and most importantly, securing her fortune. A fortune, he revealed, that was not stolen from the Thornes, but was her own family's money that Victor Sr. had illegally absorbed. My grandmother was not a thief. She was a reclaimer. But she feared the Thornes would never stop looking, Mr. Gable continued. They were obsessed with the idea that she had stolen their legacy. So, my father helped her set up a series of complex, impenetrable trusts. The fortune was hidden, protected, to be passed down to you, her only heir. He then opened his own file, a modern, slim folder. "Which is why, when you announced your engagement to Alex Miller 10 years ago, I commissioned a private investigation. Your grandmother's greatest fear had come true." He slid a report across the desk. And there it was. My husband's entire life, a meticulously constructed lie. His real name was Alexander Thorne, the great-grandson of Victor Thorne Sr.'s brother. The Thorne family, after losing their primary fortune, had spent 2 generations rebuilding, all while nursing a venomous, obsessive grudge. They believed Lillian had stolen a mythical family treasure, and they had trained their most promising son, Alexander, for a single mission: to find Lillian's heir, to marry her, and to reclaim the Thorne legacy. His orphan backstory was a fabrication. His consulting job was a sham funded by the Thorne family. His entire personality, the charming, loving man I had fallen for, was a carefully honed performance. I was not his wife. I was his lifelong mission. I was the mark. I looked at the picture of my smiling husband in the report, and the last embers of my love for him turned to ash. The grief was gone. In its place was a quiet, glacial rage. He thinks the entire fortune is a simple inheritance that will pass to me upon my death, I said, my voice dangerously calm. He doesn't know about the trusts, does he? He doesn't know that I already control everything. He has no idea, Mr. Gable confirmed. He thinks he is slowly gaining your trust to eventually seize control. He is a wolf circling a flock of sheep, unaware that the shepherd is watching him through a sniper scope. A slow, cold smile, a smile I recognized as my grandmother's, spread across my face. Good, I said. Then he's about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating the women of this family. He came to my home to play a game. It's time we raised the stakes. My performance began that very night. I was no longer the grieving, suspicious wife. I was the loving, naive, and now, suddenly, incredibly wealthy heiress. I sat Alex down, my face a perfect mask of bewildered excitement, my hands trembling for effect. Alex, I said, my voice breathless, you won't believe it. Mr. Gable called. My grandmother. She wasn't just a simple country woman. She was secretly wealthy. There's a trust, a massive one. And I'm the sole beneficiary. I watched him. It was a masterful performance of his own. His eyes widened in feigned shock. He pulled me into his arms, his body thrumming with a barely concealed excitement. Clara. My God. Wealthy? How wealthy? Millions, Alex, I whispered into his chest. I don't even know how many. I'm so overwhelmed. Shh, it's okay, baby, he soothed, stroking my hair. But I could feel the hunter's thrill in his touch. He thought the prey had just fallen into his lap. We're in this together. I'll help you manage it. You won't have to worry about a thing. I'll help you. He was going to help me right out of my fortune. The dance of deception began. He became the doting husband, shielding his naive wife from the complexities of high finance. He brought in his team, a group of financial advisors and lawyers who, according to Mr. Gable's secret checks, were all on the Thorne family payroll. They presented me with elaborate plans for offshore accounts and investment schemes. Don't you worry about the details, honey, Alex would say, patting my hand after a long, jargon-filled meeting. This is my world. I'll make our fortune grow. He thought he was a financial genius, moving my money into accounts he controlled. In reality, he was playing with digital smoke and mirrors. The accounts Mr. Gable and I had set up were decoys, phantom funds that he could manipulate to his heart's content, all while the real fortune remained safely locked away, untouchable. He was a master thief, stealing counterfeit money. His arrogance became a spectacle. He bought a new sports car, an Aston Martin. It's important to project an image of success, Clara. It attracts more wealth, he explained. He started talking about buying a larger house, a proper estate in the countryside. He was spending the money he thought he had stolen, going deeper and deeper into a trap of his own making. The most difficult part was the intimacy. To share my bed with a man who was my sworn enemy. To endure his touch, which felt like a spider crawling on my skin. To return his kisses, which tasted of lies. But I channeled my grandmother's strength. I played my part. I was the loving wife, the grateful heiress, the perfect, unsuspecting fool. I knew that the longer the con, the sweeter the revenge. The months that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I was living on a knife's edge, a performer in the most intimate and dangerous play of my life. Every day was a tightrope walk between feigned love and cold, calculated hatred. Alex, consumed by his own impending victory, became bolder, more reckless. His contempt for me, once carefully hidden, began to seep through the cracks of his perfect husband facade. He would talk on the phone in hushed, urgent tones with his father, discussions he thought I couldn't hear. I had Mr. Gable install state-of-the-art listening devices throughout the house. I heard everything. "She's completely clueless, Dad," I heard him whisper one night, standing in the garden just outside the kitchen window. "She thinks I'm a financial god. She just signed over access to another portfolio. She doesn't even read the documents. It's almost too easy." I heard his father's gruff voice on the other end. "Don't get cocky, son. Just get the money, all of it. This is about more than wealth. It's about restoring the Thorne name. It's about vengeance for what that woman, Lillian, did to our family." Vengeance. They saw themselves as the heroes of their own twisted story, righting a historical wrong. The irony was so bitter, it was almost poetic. I continued to play the part of the doting, simple-minded wife. I would ask him silly questions about the stock market. I would praise his brilliance in front of our friends who had started to notice the change in him. "Clara, is Alex okay?" my friend Sarah asked me over lunch one day. "He's become so flashy, and the way he talks about money now, it's all he talks about. It's not like him." "He's just excited about our new financial future," I lied smoothly. "He's under a lot of pressure, trying to manage everything for me." "Be careful, Clara," she warned. "He seems like a different person." "He is," I thought. "And you have no idea." The final gambit, the move that would spring the trap, was Alex's idea. It was a testament to his supreme arrogance. He came to me one evening, his eyes gleaming with a feverish excitement. He spread out a set of blueprints on the dining room table. "Honey, I've found it," he announced. "The ultimate investment. A historic property on the coast. The old Blackwood Manor. It's in disrepair, but it's a landmark. We can buy it, restore it, and turn it into a world-class luxury hotel. It will be the crown jewel of our empire. It will make us legends." He was right about one thing. Blackwood Manor was a legend. It was also a notorious money pit, a crumbling relic that had bankrupted its last 3 owners. It was beautiful, historic, and financially cursed. "It requires a significant investment," he continued, his voice low and persuasive. "We'll need to liquidate a substantial portion of the trust. A single, large transfer. It's a big move, Clara, but it's the one that solidifies our legacy. This was it. The moment he would consolidate all the phantom assets into one place, a place from which he believed he could make them disappear into his own accounts forever. It was a beautiful, elegant, and utterly foolish plan. Mr. Gable and I had been waiting for this. We had already set up the shell corporation that owned Blackwood Manor. We had prepared the documents. I looked at Alex, my face a perfect picture of wide-eyed awe and wifely devotion. A hotel? Our own hotel? Oh, Alex, that's a dream. I put my hand to my chest, feigning breathlessness. But is it safe? It's so much money. Trust me, Clara, he said, taking my hands in his. His grip was tight, his eyes intense. He was so close to the finish line. This is what I was born to do. This is what our family does. We build empires. No, I thought. Your family destroys them, and my family reclaims them. Okay, Alex, I whispered, my voice trembling with fake adoration. I trust you. Let's do it. He thought he was about to become a king. He had no idea he was a pawn, willingly walking to the edge of the board to be sacrificed. The day of the signing was set for a Friday. The stage was a grand, wood-paneled boardroom in a skyscraper downtown, the offices of Thorne and Associates, the fake advisory firm Alex's family had set up. It was a room built to intimidate, with a massive table and a panoramic view of the city that seemed to declare dominion over everything it surveyed. I walked in on Alex's arm, the perfect image of the supportive, slightly nervous wife. He was electric, buzzing with a triumphant energy that was almost palpable. He was dressed in a suit so sharp it could have cut glass. He was about to avenge his family's 70-year-old shame. He was about to become a legend. His father, Jonathan Thorne, was there, his uncle, and his cousin, Frank. The whole clan of vultures had gathered to witness the final kill. They all smiled at me, their smiles thin and predatory. They saw me as a means to an end, a temporary inconvenience on the path to their glorious restoration. The documents were spread across the table, a mountain of legal jargon. They were, as Mr. Gable had confirmed, a masterfully crafted instrument of fraud, detailing the liquidation of the Henderson Trust and the transfer of $50 million to an offshore holding company that controlled the Blackwood Manor project. Clara, my dear, Jonathan Thorne said, his voice a low, gravelly purr. A historic day for our families. A union of legacies. I just smiled sweetly. It's all very exciting. Alex pushed the documents in front of me, along with an expensive fountain pen. Just here, here, and here, honey, he said, his voice tight with anticipation. Then we can pop the champagne. I picked up the pen. I looked around the room, at the faces of the men who had conspired to destroy my life, to desecrate my grandmother's memory. I saw my great-grandfather's ruin in their greedy eyes. I saw my grandmother's pain, and I felt a righteous fury, as cold and as clean as a winter dawn. I put the pen down. What is it, Clara? Alex asked, his smile faltering. Second thoughts? Just one, I said, my voice quiet but carrying an unnatural weight in the silent room. Before I sign away my entire family's legacy, I'd like to call my lawyer, just to have him look it over one last time, for my peace of mind." Alex laughed, a sound that was suddenly brittle. "Honey, we've been over this. These are the best lawyers in the country. You don't need your little small-town attorney for this." "Nevertheless," I insisted, my voice hardening slightly, "I won't sign a thing without Mr. Gable's approval. It was my grandmother's final wish." A flicker of annoyance crossed Jonathan Thorne's face. "Let her make the call," he grumbled. "Let's get this over with." I pulled out my phone and dialed Mr. Gable. I put him on speakerphone. "Mr. Gable, it's Clara. I'm here with Alex and his family. They have some papers they'd like me to sign. It's for the Blackwood Manor project." "Blackwood Manor?" Mr. Gable's voice crackled through the speaker, filled with practiced alarm. "Clara, do not sign anything. I've just received a preliminary report from my investigators. That property is a financial black hole, and the holding company they want you to transfer funds to, it's a shell corporation based in a non-extradition country. This is not an investment, Clara. It's theft." The room temperature dropped 20 degrees. Alex leaped to his feet. "What is this? Who is this man? This is slander." "My name is Marcus Gable, Jr.," Mr. Gable's voice boomed from the phone. "And I am the legal counsel for the Henderson Family Trust. And I am officially informing you, Mr. Thorne, and everyone in this room, that this transaction is fraudulent. I am invoking the Protective Measures Clause of the Trust, which freezes all assets pending an investigation into hostile and predatory activity." "You have no authority," Jonathan Thorne roared. "On the contrary," Mr. Gable said, his voice now chillingly calm. "As per the Trust's bylaws, which your expert lawyers clearly failed to read, any attempt to defraud the primary trustee, my client, Clara Sinclair, results in the immediate and permanent termination of all beneficiary rights for the aggressor party and their entire lineal family. In short, Mr. Thorne, your family just disinherited itself." At that precise moment, the boardroom doors swung open. Two stern-faced, impeccably dressed men walked in. They were not lawyers. Their suits did not hide the cold authority that radiated from them. "Alexander Thorne," the first man said, his voice flat and official, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering." As one agent pulled Alex's arms behind his back and the sound of handcuffs clicked shut, the other agent turned to Jonathan, Frank, and the rest of the Thorne clan. "All of you are persons of interest in a federal investigation. You will not leave this city." Alex stood there, cuffed, his face a grotesque mask of utter disbelief. His perfect, handsome face, the face I had loved for a decade, was now the face of a common criminal. He looked at me, his eyes finally seeing me for the first time, not as a naive wife, not as a mark, but as his destroyer. "You," he whispered, the single word filled with a universe of hate and horrified understanding. This was you. I stood up and walked over to him. I looked him straight in the eye, my gaze as cold and as hard as a diamond. My grandmother taught me many things, Leo, I said, using his real name for the first time, the name of the boy in the photo. She taught me how to plant a garden, how to bake bread, and she taught me that when you find a snake in your house, you don't just shoo it out the door. You cut off its head and you burn the nest to the ground so it can never, ever come back. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. Checkmate. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the entire Thorne dynasty in the ruins of their own greed. Their 70-year war lost in a single, beautiful, and devastatingly final move. My grandmother's ghost could finally rest. The downfall of the Thorne dynasty was not a quiet affair. It was a public spectacle, a financial blockbuster. Mr. Gable, with the precision of a master surgeon, had orchestrated not just the arrests, but a full-scale media assault. The story broke that very afternoon, a headline that screamed across every major financial news network. Thorne family empire crumbles in decades-old revenge plot. The article was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, detailing the entire sordid history, from Alistair the Devil, Vance's initial betrayal of my great-grandfather, to my grandmother Lillian's daring escape and the 70-year grudge that followed, culminating in the arrest of Alexander Thorne, the golden boy sent to finish the war. I was painted as the unwitting, tragic heroine, the sleeping heiress who had been targeted by a family of corporate psychopaths. My privacy was protected, my name mentioned only as the Sinclair heir. The world saw me as a victim. Only a handful of us knew I had been the architect of the entire demolition. The legal repercussions were swift and brutal. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, the fraudulent documents they had asked me to sign, the recordings of their conspiratorial phone calls, the intricate paper trail of shell corporations, the Thorne family had no defense. To avoid spending the rest of their lives in federal prison, they were forced into a settlement that was nothing short of total annihilation. They had to liquidate every asset. Their sprawling estates, their fleets of luxury cars, their art collections, their last vestiges of a life built on a foundation of lies. It was all sold off to pay the astronomical federal fines and to settle the civil lawsuits Mr. Gable had filed on my behalf for a decade of emotional distress and financial conspiracy. The Thorne name, once a whispered word of power in old financial circles, was now a public punchline, a synonym for greed and spectacular failure. They weren't just broke, they were a disgrace. Their 70-year obsession with reclaiming their stolen fortune had led to their final public extinction. I watched it all unfold from the quiet sanctuary of my grandmother's house. I felt no joy, no triumphant glee. I felt a profound and quiet sense of closure. It was like finishing a long, difficult book. The story was over. The villains had been vanquished, and a strange, unfamiliar peace began to settle in my soul. I started the long, difficult process of reclaiming my own life. I sold the house I had shared with Alex, a place now tainted with the ghost of his betrayal. I moved permanently into my grandmother's cozy, lavender-scented home. It felt like coming home in a way I hadn't realized I was missing. The fortune, my grandmother's legacy, was now fully and indisputably mine. It was a number so vast, it felt abstract, unreal. I had no desire for the things it could buy, the yachts, the mansions, the designer clothes. That was their dream, not mine. My grandmother had used her wealth as a shield, a tool for survival. I decided to use it as a sword, but a sword that built rather than destroyed. I sat down with Mr. Gable, who now looked at me with a deep paternal respect. "What now, Clara?" he asked. "The world is yours." "I want to honor her, Mr. Gable," I said. "I want to honor Lillian, not just her memory, but her spirit, her courage." And so, the Lillian Project was born. It was not a typical charity. It was a covert, powerful organization dedicated to helping women escape from controlling and abusive situations. We didn't just offer shelter and legal aid. We used the vast resources and the network of investigators and lawyers at my disposal to do what my grandmother had done. We helped women disappear. We created new identities, secured new homes in new cities, and built financial firewalls to protect them from their pursuers. We turned a fortune built on one woman's escape into an underground railroad for countless others. My life, once a quiet story of art and love, became a secret saga of liberation. I was the invisible hand behind it all, the quiet art historian by day and the anonymous benefactor by night. I found a purpose that was more fulfilling than any painting, more profound than any love story I had ever read. I was finishing my grandmother's work. Life settled into a new, meaningful rhythm. The days were filled with the quiet, satisfying work of the Lillian Project. I read the stories of women from all walks of life, each one a heartbreaking echo of my grandmother's own ordeal. A corporate wife whose husband controlled every penny she spent. A young woman trapped in a family that saw her as a commodity to be married off. An artist whose partner belittled her talent and sabotaged her career. In each of their stories, I saw a reflection of the Thorne mentality, the belief that people, especially women, were assets to be owned and controlled. And in each successful extraction, as we called them, I felt a thrill of righteous victory. When we helped a woman named Maria and her 2 children disappear from her abusive husband's grip, setting them up in a new city with a new life, I felt my grandmother's spirit smiling. We were not just giving them charity. We were giving them the one thing my grandmother had fought so hard for: freedom. My personal life was quiet. The friends who had known me as Alex's wife slowly faded away. They didn't know what to make of the quiet, single woman who had emerged from the ashes of a public scandal. I didn't mind. I had Mr. Gable, who had become a father figure to me, and my small, dedicated team at the foundation. My life was smaller, but it was more real. One afternoon, I was visiting a small, independent art gallery downtown that the foundation was sponsoring. The artist was a young, brilliant painter named Sarah, whose work was bold and full of life. She was telling me about her inspiration, her eyes shining with passion. "I paint about survival," she said, "about the beauty that can grow from broken places." "I understand that," I said, a genuine smile touching my lips. As we were talking, a man entered the gallery. He was tall, with kind eyes and hands that were stained with clay. He was a sculptor whose studio was next door. He introduced himself as Ben. He didn't know who I was, other than a patron of the arts. We started talking, not about money or status, but about art, about the way a line or a shadow could tell a whole story. The conversation was easy, natural. It was the first time in over 10 years I had spoken to a man without a wall of suspicion around my heart. It wasn't a romance. It was just a conversation, a spark of normal, human connection, and it felt like a miracle. It was a sign that the ghost of Alexander Thorne was finally beginning to fade. 2 years after the fall of the Thorne Dynasty, I received a letter. It was forwarded from Mr. Gable's office. The envelope was cheap, the handwriting on it shaky and unfamiliar. It had been sent from a federal prison in another state. It was from Alex. My first instinct was to burn it, to not let his poison touch my new life. But curiosity, and perhaps a need for final closure, made me open it. The letter was short, written on thin prison stationery. "Clara," it began, "I have had a lot of time to think in this place, to think about my life, my family, my choices. For the longest time, I was consumed with hate for you. I saw you as the villain who had destroyed my life, who had stolen my birthright. I cursed your name every night. But time in a place like this, it strips away the lies, the ones we tell others, and more importantly, the ones we tell ourselves. The truth is, my life was a lie long before you uncovered it. I was raised on a diet of poison, a poison of entitlement, of grievance, of a stolen glory I was tasked to reclaim. I never had a chance to be anyone other than the soldier my family created. I don't write this to ask for your forgiveness. I know that's impossible. I write this because I need to tell you something that has haunted me every single day. In the beginning, for the first year, my mission was just a job. You were the mark. But then, something happened. I got to know you. I saw your kindness, your intelligence, your quiet strength. I saw the way you loved your grandmother's memory, and I fell in love with you. I really did. That's the real tragedy. The con became real. I loved you, Clara, but I was a coward. I was trapped between the woman I loved and the family I was programmed to obey. I chose my programming, and I lost everything. I lost the only real thing I ever had. I hope one day you can find it in your heart not to forgive me, but to believe that small part, to believe that somewhere inside the monster there was a man who genuinely loved you. Yours, always, Alex. I read the letter once, then twice. I didn't know what to feel. Was it one last, desperate con? A final attempt to manipulate me? Or was it a genuine deathbed confession from a man whose soul was already dead? I walked out to my garden, the letter in my hand. I looked at the lavender bushes, swaying gently in the breeze. I thought of my grandmother, Lillian. She had escaped a monster. But had she ever mourned the man he could have been? I realized, with a sudden clarity, that it didn't matter if his words were true. It didn't change anything. His love, even if it had been real, was a weak and worthless thing, no match for the generational poison in his blood. He was a sad story, a casualty of a war he was born into. But he was no longer my story. I went to the fireplace, the same fireplace where I had found my grandmother's secrets. I dropped the letter into the flames and watched as the paper curled, turned black, and vanished into smoke. Alex, Leo, Victor, all of them were finally, truly, just ghosts, and I was no longer haunted. A few more years passed. The Lillian Project became a national force, a beacon of hope for thousands of women. My life was full, rich with purpose. I continued my friendship with Ben, the sculptor. Our conversations about art evolved into shared dinners, long walks on the beach, and an easy, comfortable companionship built on honesty and mutual respect. He knew my story, the public version of it, and he didn't care about the money or the scandal. He cared about me, Clara, the woman who could talk for hours about Renaissance art and who had a laugh that he said sounded like wind chimes. One day, Mr. Gable called me. "Clara," he said, his voice grave. "I have some news. Alexander Thorne was released from prison early on parole." For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old fear, but it was just a flicker. "Okay," I said calmly. "He's petitioned the court for a formal in-person apology," Mr. Gable continued. "His parole board thinks it's part of his rehabilitation. You are under no obligation to accept." I thought about it. The old Clara would have hidden. The new Clara, the woman my grandmother had forged, knew what she had to do. "Set up the meeting," I said, "in my house." A week later, he stood on my doorstep. The man who had been my husband. He was a shadow of his former self. He was thin, his expensive suit replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting one. The arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by a deep, weary brokenness. His eyes, once so full of fire and charm, were hollow. I led him not into the formal living room, but into the kitchen. I poured him a cup of coffee. We sat at the small kitchen table, the silence stretching between us. "Thank you for seeing me," he finally said, his voice a low rasp. "Why are you here, Alex?" I asked. "To say I'm sorry," he whispered, looking down at his hands. "Not for the money, not for the lies, but for the 10 years. For stealing 10 years of your life that you could have spent with someone who truly deserved you. For taking your love and turning it into a weapon against you. That is the crime I can never atone for." He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with tears, real tears. "The letter I sent you," he said. "It was true. I did love you, and losing you was the only real thing I lost." I looked at him, this broken man, and I felt the last vestiges of my anger, my hatred just dissolve. All that was left was a profound, quiet sadness. A pity for the man he could have been, for the life we could have had, if not for the ghosts of his family. "I believe you," I said softly, and I was surprised to find that I did. "But it doesn't change anything. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed." "I know," he said, nodding. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know. And I needed to tell you that I am going to try to be a better man, to build a life, a real one, with my own 2 hands." He stood up to leave. At the door, he turned back one last time. "Your grandmother," he said. "She was a remarkable woman. She won. Tell her I said that." He walked away, and I closed the door. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel victory. I felt a quiet, profound release. The war was finally, truly over. That evening, Ben came over for dinner. We sat in the garden, surrounded by the scent of blooming lavender, the stars beginning to appear in the twilight sky. I told him about Alex's visit. He listened patiently, his hand covering mine on the table. "Are you okay?" he asked when I finished. "I am," I said, and I realized it was the absolute truth. For the first time, I think the story is completely over. It's no longer my story to carry. "Good," he said, smiling his kind, gentle smile, "because I think our story is just beginning." Later that night, I went up to the attic. I opened the heavy, leather-bound trunk. I looked at the old photo albums, at the journals, at the faded picture of little Victor. These were not ghosts anymore. They were just history. A story of pain, of betrayal, but also of incredible strength and survival. A story that had, in the end, led me here, to this moment of peace, to a life of purpose, to a future I would write for myself. I closed the trunk, not with sadness, but with gratitude. My grandmother, Lillian, had given me more than a fortune. She had given me a legacy of resilience. She had taught me that the greatest power is not in wealth or in status, but in the quiet, unshakable strength of a woman who refuses to be erased. She had lost her name, her home, her son, but she had never, ever lost the war. And now, neither had I. The Sinclair women were survivors, and our story was, at long last, one of peace. If you liked my story, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to know how far my story has traveled. And what do you think is the best way to honor the legacy of those who came before us? I'm always curious to read your opinions. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Until the next story, take care, with love and respect.